Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the English Globe, your home for learning English through real global discussions. I'm Adam, and today I'm here with my amazing co-host, Julia. Together, we'll take you on a journey of learning English through international stories that shape our world. Whether you are listening from Asia, Europe, Africa, or the Americas, we are so happy to have you here with us today. Remember, our mission is not only to help you improve your English, but also to help you understand the world through language.
Thank you, Adam, and hello to all our wonderful listeners around the world. We're so excited to bring you another fascinating topic today. Here at the English Globe, we believe that learning English becomes much easier and more interesting when we connect it to real events happening around us. Today's topic is both thought-provoking and educational. We'll be discussing an important global question. Is Donald Trump planning to meet Kim Jong-un again? This question has attracted attention around the world, and it gives us a chance to explore not just politics, but also the power of communication, diplomacy, and English itself.
That's right, Julia. And before we start our detailed conversation, we would love to kindly ask all our listeners to support our educational podcast by liking this video and subscribing to the English Globe. Your support helps us continue creating free English content every week. Also, we'd really love to hear from you. Please tell us in the comments where you are listening from and what you think about today's topic. Are you joining us from a busy city, a quiet village, or maybe your classroom or study corner? We always enjoy reading your stories and opinions from around the world.
Yes, we truly do. Your comments motivate us and help other learners feel connected too. Now, let's talk about today's topic. The question, is Trump planning to meet Kim Jong-un again, may sound political, but for English learners, it's also an opportunity to practice listening, learn new words, and explore how people around the world discuss international issues in English. We'll speak slowly and clearly, explaining key vocabulary as we go, so even if English is your second language, you'll be able to follow along easily.
When we talk about Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, we are referring to two leaders who became well known for their unusual meetings a few years ago. Trump was the president of the United States, and Kim Jong-un is the leader of North Korea. These two countries have had a long and complicated relationship, full of tension, negotiation, and history. For many years, they had almost no direct communication, and then suddenly, these two leaders met face to face, something the world had never seen before.
Exactly, Adam. Their meetings created global headlines and opened discussions about peace, nuclear weapons, and diplomacy. For English learners, studying such real events is a great way to improve both vocabulary and comprehension. When you listen carefully to how international news is explained in English, you not only understand the story, but also learn how to use important words like negotiation, summit, peace talks, and diplomatic relations. Each of these words has deep meaning and is often used in global discussions.
That's true, Julia. And the interesting thing about this topic is that it connects language with culture and international relations. When people learn English, they also open a door to understanding how leaders communicate, how media presents stories, and how small words can carry big messages. So today, we're going to explore what those past meetings meant, what lessons they gave to the world, and whether there's any sign that a new meeting might happen again in the future.
And remember, dear listeners, we are not here to judge or take sides. Our goal is to discuss the topic neutrally and educationally. That's very important because the English Globe is a learning platform, not a political one. We want to use real global topics to help you improve your English step by step. By listening to our podcast, you'll learn not only about grammar and pronunciation, but also about how English is used in diplomacy, news, and everyday communication.
That's such an important point, Julia. We also encourage our audience to think critically while they listen. You can take notes, write down new words, and even repeat after us to improve your pronunciation. If you hear an unfamiliar term, pause the podcast, write it down, and look it up later. That's one of the best ways to learn English effectively, by connecting your curiosity with language learning.
And as we move forward, we'll explain each event clearly, without using difficult political terms. This way, you can enjoy the story while practicing your listening skills. We'll start from the background, how the United States and North Korea became political rivals, what led to those meetings between Trump and Kim, and what the world learned from them. It's like traveling through history with English as your guide.
Exactly. And before we dive into those moments, I want to remind everyone again to subscribe to the English Globe if you haven't yet. Our channel is growing because of amazing learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss our future podcasts, which include global topics, culture discussions, and powerful English lessons for all levels. Also, please give this video a like. It really helps us reach more students across the world who want to improve their English through world stories like this one.
That's right. Every like, comment, and share means a lot to us. So, as we start this educational journey, get ready to listen carefully, think deeply, and learn naturally. You're not just listening to a podcast, you're training your ear to understand real spoken English while discovering what's happening in our world. Today's episode is not about politics, it's about the connection between communication, leadership, and language.
Well said, Julia. So, dear listeners, are you ready to begin? Let's travel back a few years and understand how these two leaders, from very different worlds, decided to sit together at one table. Let's see what history can teach us, not only about world events, but also about how English can bridge differences and bring people together through understanding. To really understand whether Donald Trump might meet Kim Jong-un again, we first need to look back at how the relationship between the United States and North Korea began. This history is long and full of lessons for English learners because it shows how words, tone, and communication shape international relations. Everything started after World War II, when the Korean peninsula was divided into two parts, the North and the South. The North became influenced by the Soviet Union, while the South was supported by the United States.
Yes, Adam. And in 1950, that division led to one of the most devastating wars in modern Asian history, the Korean War. It lasted for 3 years, from 1950 to 1953, and although millions of people were affected, there was never a clear winner. The war ended with an armistice, which means a stop to fighting, but not a full peace agreement. So technically, North and South Korea are still at war today, even though the fighting stopped more than 70 years ago. This situation has created a constant sense of tension that continues to this day.
That's right, Julia. And the United States became deeply involved because it supported South Korea during that conflict. After the war, American troops stayed in the South to help protect it from future attacks. On the other hand, North Korea became increasingly isolated from the rest of the world, focusing on building its own system and developing military strength. This divide not only shaped Korean history, but also affected global politics for decades. For English learners, words like armistice, alliance, and conflict are key to understanding this topic.
Exactly, Adam. Now, if we move forward in time, we see that in the 1990s and early 2000s, North Korea started developing nuclear weapons. This became a major concern for the international community, especially the United States. The idea of denuclearization, meaning the removal of nuclear weapons, became the main goal of negotiations between both countries. But the process was never simple. Each side had demands, conditions, and mistrust that made reaching an agreement very difficult. These moments show how diplomacy requires careful words and patience. You're absolutely right, Julia. The word diplomacy itself is very important for our listeners to understand. It means solving international problems through discussion rather than conflict. In diplomacy, language plays a huge role. Every word can change the meaning of an agreement. For example, saying we will work toward peace is softer and more flexible than saying we will achieve peace immediately. The first sounds possible and polite, while the second sounds like a promise that might fail if not achieved. That's why diplomats choose their words so carefully. That's a brilliant point, Adam. And when it comes to North Korea, communication has always been complicated. The country is known for its strict control over information, which makes it hard for other nations to know what's really happening inside. Meanwhile, the United States and its allies have tried to use talks, sanctions, and pressure to stop the development of nuclear weapons. The word sanctions means restrictions or punishments used by one country or group of countries to make another change its behavior. In this case, it often refers to limits on trade or financial support.
Yes, and these sanctions have affected North Korea's economy for many years. But despite that, the leadership in Pyongyang, the capital city, has always focused on independence and military power. Kim Jong-un, who took over leadership in 2011 after his father Kim Jong-il passed away, continued that direction but also began to use diplomacy more actively. For example, he met leaders from South Korea and even the United States, something that earlier generations of North Korean leaders had never done before. Those meetings were seen as historic.
And it's interesting, Adam, because the world didn't expect such meetings to happen. The relationship between the United States and North Korea had been filled with threats, strong language, and tension for so many years. Then suddenly, in 2018, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un agreed to meet face-to-face. For many people, it was shocking. Imagine two leaders who had exchanged very harsh words on social media, suddenly shaking hands in front of the cameras. It was an image that the world never thought it would see. And it marked a new chapter in diplomacy.
Exactly. And before we move to that moment in history, I think it's important to explain how both leaders communicated in the years before that meeting. Trump, known for his direct and sometimes unpredictable communication style, often used strong language. Kim Jong-un, on the other hand, responded through official state statements that were equally strong. But despite the tension, there was one interesting lesson for English learners, that even in conflict, communication continues. The way leaders use language reflects their national image and diplomatic goals.
That's very true. And this is where English learners can observe how tone, context, and vocabulary create meaning. For example, when one leader says, "We are open to dialogue," it suggests a possibility for peace. But when someone says we will respond strongly, it signals warning or defense. These differences in expression can change the mood of international relations. It shows how language itself becomes a tool of power and persuasion. Understanding these expressions helps learners interpret international news more accurately in English.
Yes, Julia. Another important point for our listeners is the concept of trust in international relations. Building trust takes time, and words play a big part in it. When leaders make statements or promises, the world watches to see whether those words are followed by actions. If they are not, trust decreases. For English learners, this can be compared to real-life communication. When we say something and do the opposite, our words lose meaning. So, language is powerful, not only between nations, but also between individuals.
That's a wonderful comparison, Adam. And in the case of the United States and North Korea, the lack of trust has been one of the main reasons progress is so slow. Over the years, there were agreements, then disagreements, then new talks again. It's like a long cycle of hope and disappointment, but when Trump and Kim finally decided to meet, it gave many people hope that direct communication might succeed where years of distance had failed. That's what made those meetings so historic and worth studying for English learners and global citizens alike.
Absolutely. And another thing we can learn from this background is how international news often simplifies complex situations. When you read or listen to news in English, remember that every story has context. Don't just memorize words, try to understand the background behind them. For example, the phrase peace talks may sound simple, but it often involves months of planning, negotiation, and cultural understanding. So when English learners follow world news, they are also learning about patience, respect, and dialogue.
Exactly. And that's what makes today's episode so valuable. We're not just talking about Trump and Kim Jong-un, we're exploring how history, communication, and leadership connect through language. The Korean War, the decades of silence, and the return to diplomacy all show how powerful communication can be. Every handshake, every statement, and every phrase spoken between leaders carries meaning. Understanding that helps us all become better communicators, no matter what language we speak.
So, before we move on to the next part of our podcast, let's quickly summarize this section for our listeners. The relationship between the United States and North Korea has been shaped by history, war, and distrust. Yet, communication, even difficult communication, has always continued. The meetings between Trump and Kim Jong-un were not random. They were the result of decades of tension and small steps toward dialogue. And for English learners, these events provide real-life examples of how language builds bridges in even the most complex situations.
Beautifully said, Adam. So, dear listeners, take a moment to think about what we've discussed. When you listen to world news in English, remember to focus on more than just the surface of the story. Try to understand the background, the emotions, and the power of words behind every sentence. That's how you become not only fluent in English, but also globally aware. In our next part, we'll travel to Singapore, where history was made, when Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un met face-to-face for the very first time.
Now that we've explored the long and complicated background between the United States and North Korea, let's move forward to one of the most historic moments of recent years, the 2018 Singapore Summit. It was a meeting that many people around the world never expected to happen. On June 12, 2018, U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met face-to-face in Singapore, marking the first time in history that a sitting American president had met with a North Korean leader.
That's right, Adam. The images from that day were broadcast across every news channel, and millions of people were watching. For many, it felt almost unbelievable to see the two leaders shaking hands, smiling, and sitting down at the same table. The meeting took place at the luxurious Capella Hotel on Sentosa Island, a quiet and peaceful location chosen to symbolize calmness and neutrality. The world held its breath, waiting to see what this moment would mean for the future of peace on the Korean peninsula.
Yes, Julia. The atmosphere around that time was filled with both hope and curiosity. After years of threats, sanctions, and military tensions, people were asking whether this meeting could open a new chapter. For English learners, this event is a wonderful example of how language and diplomacy work together. Every word, every expression, and even every gesture during that meeting had meaning. The simple act of saying, "Nice to meet you," between the two leaders carried a deep message of potential change and communication.
Exactly. And one of the most interesting things about that summit was how it focused on dialogue instead of confrontation. The main topic was denuclearization, which means the process of reducing or removing nuclear weapons. Both sides had different expectations, but they agreed that peace and cooperation were important. For learners, words like agreement, cooperation, negotiation, and commitment are very useful, because they are common in discussions about diplomacy and business as well.
That's a good point, Julia. During the meeting, Trump and Kim signed a joint statement that included several key ideas. First, they agreed to work toward the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Second, they promised to build new relations between their countries. Third, they said they would work together to recover the remains of soldiers who died during the Korean War, a symbolic gesture to show respect and reconciliation. These statements were broad, but they represented a beginning, a small step toward trust.
Yes, Adam and many analysts describe the summit as more symbolic than practical. It didn't lead to immediate policy changes or major agreements, but it changed the tone of the conversation between both countries. Before that, communication had been mostly filled with harsh language and threats. After the summit, even though there were still disagreements, the world saw that dialogue was possible. That's a very important lesson for English learners, that communication can open doors even when complete understanding seems impossible.
You're absolutely right. And it's worth noting that the Singapore summit was not only about politics, but also about performance and image. Both Trump and Kim understood the power of visuals in the modern media world. The handshake, the smiles, the flags of both nations standing side by side, all these moments were carefully planned to send a message to the global audience. It reminded everyone that sometimes diplomacy begins not with results, but with symbols that prepare people's minds for future cooperation.
That's beautifully said, Adam. And for English learners listening today, there's a great opportunity to study the language used around this event. Words like historic meeting, breakthrough, summit diplomacy, and joint declaration appeared again and again in news reports. Each of these expressions helps us describe global events in a professional and neutral way. When learners read or listen to world news, recognizing such vocabulary makes understanding easier and helps them express opinions more clearly in English.
Indeed, Julia. Another interesting part of this summit was the communication style between the two leaders. Donald Trump, known for his direct and informal approach, often used simple, short phrases. Kim Jong-un, who usually communicates through official written statements, appeared more reserved but respectful. The meeting showed two very different communication styles coming together. And for language learners, this is an excellent real-life example of how style and tone can vary depending on culture, personality, and political context.
Yes, and that's one of the most fascinating things about studying world events through English. It's not just about vocabulary, it's also about cultural understanding. When leaders meet, they must think carefully about how their words will sound to both their own people and to the world. Even small gestures like smiling, waiting to speak, or using polite expressions are carefully considered. In diplomacy, politeness and respect are essential, just like in everyday English conversations when we talk to people from different backgrounds.
Exactly, Julia. And if we look at how the media described the event, we can also learn about journalistic English. Reporters used phrases such as an unprecedented meeting, a step toward peace, and a cautious beginning. These phrases show both hope and uncertainty. The word unprecedented means something that has never happened before, and cautious means careful, not too confident. Understanding such words helps learners follow complex international stories without getting lost in translation.
That's a great observation, Adam. Another interesting part was how both leaders used interpreters during the meeting. Since Kim Jong-un doesn't speak fluent English, interpreters help translate everything in real time. This shows that communication between nations often depends on translators, who play a very delicate role. They must choose words carefully to maintain meaning, respect, and emotion. For learners, this also shows why learning English is such a powerful skill. It can connect people from very different worlds without needing translation.
Yes, that's such a good reminder, Julia. English has become the main language of diplomacy and global communication. Even in meetings between leaders whose native languages are completely different, English often serves as the bridge language. And this is one of the key reasons why learning English can open so many doors. It's not only about grammar or pronunciation, it's about being part of a global conversation that connects people, countries, and cultures.
Exactly, Adam. And after the Singapore summit, the world was curious to see what would happen next. There was optimism, but also doubt. Some people believed it was the beginning of lasting peace, while others thought it was just a show without real progress. What's important for us as learners and global citizens is to observe how language was used to shape that narrative. When the media says progress, it suggests hope. When they say uncertain future, it shows caution. Each phrase carries an emotion behind it.
Very true. And for English learners, listening to such words helps develop both vocabulary and emotional intelligence. The Singapore meeting teaches us that communication can change the mood of international relations, even without immediate results. The handshake itself became a global symbol of peace and dialogue. In a world where words are often used to divide, that moment reminded us that simple communication, a conversation, a greeting, a respectful exchange, can have extraordinary power.
That's beautifully put, Adam. And to our dear listeners, as you listen to this story, try to think of the vocabulary you can take from it. Summit, handshake, negotiation, trust, optimism, declaration. You can even write these words down and practice using them in your own sentences. For example, the leaders held a summit to discuss peace, or trust is built through communication. When you use real-world examples, learning becomes more natural and powerful.
That's right. And one final thought before we move to the next part. The Singapore summit was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. After the excitement faded, both nations realized that turning symbolic meetings into real change would be very difficult. Promises made in the media had to be followed by concrete actions. But as we'll see in the next section, when Trump and Kim met again in 2019 in Hanoi, the atmosphere was different, and the outcome surprised many people.
Yes, the second summit was very different indeed. It's a reminder that in diplomacy, progress doesn't always move in a straight line. Sometimes it takes many meetings, misunderstandings, and compromises before true progress is made. So, dear listeners, get ready. In the next part of our podcast, we'll take you to Hanoi, Vietnam, where the story of these two leaders continued, but with new challenges, new expectations, and new lessons for English learners everywhere.
The 2019 Hanoi summit was one of the most anticipated meetings between President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. It took place in February 2019 in Hanoi, the capital city of Vietnam. The world was watching closely because their first meeting in Singapore a year earlier had created a sense of hope. Many believed this second summit could bring a major breakthrough in denuclearization, a word that means removing nuclear weapons from a country or region.
Yes, Adam, expectations were very high. Both leaders arrived in Hanoi with large teams of advisors, interpreters, and journalists. The goal was to continue discussions on how North Korea might give up its nuclear weapons program in exchange for relief from economic sanctions. These sanctions were heavy restrictions placed on North Korea by the United Nations and the United States to pressure the country to stop building nuclear weapons. However, as we later learned, the meeting did not go as planned.
That's right, Julia. The summit lasted for 2 days, and on the second day, something unexpected happened. The talks ended suddenly, and no agreement was signed. Trump said that North Korea wanted all sanctions lifted in exchange for only partial denuclearization, while Kim's side claimed they had made a reasonable offer. This disagreement led to the dramatic phrase that many newspapers used. Trump walked away from the table. It became a symbol of failed diplomacy at that moment.
That expression, walked away from the table, is actually a very common idiom in English, especially in political or business discussions. It doesn't mean someone literally stands up and leaves a table. Instead, it means they decided to end negotiations because they couldn't reach an acceptable deal. In diplomacy, it's often used when one country believes continuing the discussion would not lead to a fair or productive result. Understanding such idioms helps learners grasp how English is used in real global contexts.
Exactly, Julia. When English learners read or listen to world news, they often hear idioms like break the ice, test the waters, or draw a red line. These expressions have figurative meanings that go beyond their literal sense. For example, break the ice means to start a friendly conversation after an uncomfortable silence, and draw a red line means setting a limit that should not be crossed. These kinds of phrases make political discussions sound more vivid and meaningful.
In the case of the Hanoi summit, the phrase walked away from the table also reflected the disappointment many felt. For months, media outlets had built up the meeting as a chance for peace, progress, and maybe even an official end to the Korean War. But when the leaders left without an agreement, it reminded everyone that diplomacy is complicated and unpredictable. English learners can learn from this by noticing how tone and word choice in the news can express subtle emotions like frustration or hope.
That's a great point. Another interesting phrase that appeared after the summit was stalemate. This word means a situation where neither side can make progress because both refuse to compromise. It comes originally from chess, where a game ends in a draw because no player can move. In global politics, stalemate describes moments when negotiations freeze. For English learners, understanding such metaphors helps them see how deeply language and international relations are connected.
After the summit, both leaders returned to their countries, and the world tried to interpret what had gone wrong. Some analysts said the US expected too much, while others argued that North Korea offered too little. From an English learning point of view, this event offers a good chance to study how journalists use balanced language, words like alleged, claimed, or reportedly, to describe uncertain situations without taking sides. Such vocabulary helps students read international news critically and accurately.
Yes, Julia, and it also shows how leaders use language strategically. During his press conference after the summit, Trump said, "Sometimes you have to walk," meaning sometimes it's better to leave negotiations than accept a bad deal. That short statement became another memorable English phrase used in global politics. It teaches us that powerful communication often depends on short, clear, and confident expressions, something English learners can practice to improve their speaking skills.
In summary, the 2019 Hanoi summit was not just a political event. It was also a learning opportunity for anyone studying English. It combined international relations, diplomacy, and real-life language use. Idioms like walked away from the table or words like stalemate help learners see how vocabulary reflects real emotions, decisions, and outcomes. By studying these expressions, students can improve not only their language, but also their understanding of how world leaders communicate through English. After the 2019 Hanoi summit, the relationship between Washington and Pyongyang began to cool down significantly. The excitement that once surrounded the meetings between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un slowly faded away. For a short period, there were still some friendly messages exchanged between the two leaders, but the momentum was gone. In diplomacy, when progress suddenly stops after a period of active discussion, we often call it stalled talks. This phrase means that the process of negotiation has stopped moving forward, but it hasn't completely ended.
Yes, Julia, stalled talks became one of the most used phrases in newspapers after 2019. Journalists across the world began describing the US-North Korea dialogue as stalled, meaning it was stuck and not producing any real results. One of the main reasons for this pause was a shift in political priorities in both countries. In the United States, attention moved toward domestic issues, such as the upcoming 2020 presidential election. In North Korea, the government became more focused on strengthening internal control and maintaining economic stability under sanctions.
That's right, Adam. And as we know, the world also faced an unexpected event, the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic not only stopped international travel, but also changed the entire rhythm of global diplomacy. Leaders who once met face-to-face had to cancel summits and move to virtual conferences. For North Korea, which already had limited international communication, the health crisis made isolation even deeper. The country closed its borders entirely, cutting off trade and contact with most of the world.
Exactly. This isolation is what we might call a diplomatic freeze. In English, this phrase means that all forms of communication or cooperation between countries have stopped for a period of time. It doesn't always mean conflict or war. Rather, it shows that the two sides have chosen silence instead of dialogue. In this case, Washington and Pyongyang entered a kind of diplomatic freeze where neither side was willing to make the first move to reopen discussions. For English learners, this phrase can be useful when talking about paused relationships in politics or even in business.
That's a really good explanation, Adam. Another important word for students to learn here is tensions. This word is used when there is a feeling of stress, pressure, or disagreement between two parties. For example, journalists often wrote headlines like, "Tensions rise between the US and North Korea." The word doesn't always mean direct conflict. It can also describe a situation where fear, mistrust, or misunderstanding creates unease. In everyday English, you can use it to describe any uncomfortable situation, like tension between friends or colleagues.
Yes, tensions is a flexible word, and understanding it helps students see how tone in news reporting shapes meaning. When a journalist says, "tensions rise," it sounds more neutral and factual. But if they say, "relations collapse," the tone becomes more dramatic and emotional. That's why English learners should always pay attention to the tone of the words they read or hear. Tone is not just what is said, it's how it is said. It can make an event sound calm, serious, or even alarming depending on the reporter's choice of words.
Exactly. And this is one of the best parts of learning English through global news. Each word carries its own emotional weight. For example, saying "talk stalled" feels temporary, as if discussions could continue later. But saying negotiations broke down feels final, as if the chance for dialogue is gone completely. These small differences in expression teach students how English uses subtle word choices to shape ideas. When learners understand these shades of meaning, they can interpret the news more accurately and express themselves more clearly.
That's very true, Julia. The pause in dialogue after 2019 also showed how fragile international relationships can be. One year, two countries can appear friendly and hopeful. The next year, they can be distant and silent. The US-North Korea relationship is a good example for English learners to study how changing political and global situations affect communication. When the world faces a major event like a pandemic, leaders' priorities change. Words such as paused, halted, or suspended describe these kinds of situations perfectly.
Yes, and for learners, observing how these words are used in context is key. News outlets might write sentences like, "talks remain stalled amid growing tensions," or "diplomatic contact is frozen as both sides reassess their positions." Each of these phrases provides an opportunity to study collocations, the way certain words naturally go together in English. For example, we often say growing tensions, renewed dialogue, or stalled negotiations. Learning these patterns helps students sound more natural when speaking or writing in English.
Another interesting part of this period was how leaders used their own words to send messages. Even though there were no direct meetings, both Washington and Pyongyang occasionally made public statements through the media. These comments were carefully written to show strength or disappointment without sounding aggressive. This is known as strategic communication. For English learners, such speeches are excellent material to study persuasive language, how tone, vocabulary, and rhythm can influence public opinion and international relations.
And from an educational point of view, this stage teaches us that language is not just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about understanding context. When world leaders speak, Every word is chosen for a reason. Saying talks have stalled can sound calm and professional, while saying the other side refuses to talk sounds accusatory. English learners who want to understand world news in depth need to listen carefully for these differences in expression. It's not only about what is said, but what is meant between the lines.
That's beautifully said, Julia. The pause in dialogue after the 2019 Hanoi summit was a lesson in patience, politics, and communication. It reminded the world that diplomacy doesn't always move in a straight line. There are moments of action and moments of silence. For English learners, this is also a valuable metaphor. Learning a language can feel the same. Sometimes progress slows down, sometimes it freezes. But what matters is that you stay ready to continue when the opportunity returns. That's how growth happens, both in diplomacy and in learning. As we move into 2025, the relationship between the United States and North Korea remains one of the most closely observed in global politics. Although years have passed since the last major summit, the question still lingers. Could Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un meet again? To explore this, we must first look at the current political climate. Both nations have changed in several ways since 2019. Leadership priorities have shifted, new global challenges have emerged, and regional security issues continue to shape diplomatic behavior.
That's right, Adam. In the United States, politics have gone through cycles of transition, with different administrations shaping foreign policy in unique ways. Each leader brings a new tone and direction to diplomacy. Some may prefer engagement and dialogue, while others focus on strategic caution and sanctions. In North Korea, leadership remains under Kim Jong-un, but internal policies and international strategies may have evolved quietly behind the scenes. For English learners, this is a good opportunity to practice describing ongoing situations and possible changes using modal verbs like might, could, and may.
Exactly, Julia. These modal verbs are essential tools when talking about future or uncertain events. For example, we can say, Trump might plan another meeting with Kim Jong-un, or diplomatic talks could restart if both sides agree. These words express possibility, not certainty. In politics and diplomacy, people rarely speak in absolute terms because the future is unpredictable. Using modal verbs allows leaders, analysts, and journalists to sound professional and cautious, a tone that is highly valued in international communication.
That's such an important point for our listeners to remember. English learners often want to sound confident, but in global discussions, confidence should come with balance. For instance, saying they will meet again sounds too strong unless there is clear evidence. But saying they may meet again, or they might meet if conditions improve, sounds realistic and thoughtful. This way of speaking helps show respect for facts while still expressing an opinion. It's a perfect example of how grammar connects with diplomacy and critical thinking.
Now, if we look at the regional situation in East Asia, the political climate is still tense but stable. North Korea continues to focus on national defense and security, while nearby countries like South Korea, Japan, and China play active roles in maintaining balance. The United States, as a key partner in the region, remains committed to supporting peace and denuclearization, although strategies might differ depending on the administration. These ongoing developments suggest that a new summit between Trump and Kim could happen under the right circumstances, but it's far from guaranteed.
Yes, and in addition to political factors, we also have to consider timing and motivation. Diplomatic meetings don't happen simply because two leaders want them. They require careful planning, coordination, and mutual interest. Both sides need to feel that they can gain something from the conversation. If either side feels the risks are higher than the rewards, then talks may remain frozen. This shows why understanding the concept of conditional language is so useful. It helps describe actions that depend on certain conditions being met.
That's a great observation, Julia. We can teach our listeners how to form sentences that show such conditions. For example, if tensions decrease, both sides could consider another meeting. Or, if economic sanctions are reduced, North Korea might show more openness to dialogue. Notice how modal verbs make these statements sound balanced and flexible. They don't claim that something will happen. They simply present logical possibilities. In professional discussions, this tone creates space for further debate and avoids misunderstandings.
Exactly, Adam. It's also interesting to look at how media outlets use these same structures. News headlines often say things like, "Talks may resume soon," or "The two countries could restart dialogue if progress is made." These sentences are short, yet powerful, because they express uncertainty without spreading false information. For English learners, reading or listening to such news helps develop not only vocabulary, but also an awareness of tone and context. It teaches them how to express ideas carefully, especially when facts are still developing.
Another factor that influences the current political climate is international cooperation. The U.S. works closely with allies like South Korea and Japan, while North Korea maintains communication with China and Russia. These relationships can affect whether a new summit might take place. For example, if regional tensions ease and both sides receive diplomatic support, dialogue could reopen. But if disagreements over trade, defense, or global sanctions increase, then the chances of another meeting may become smaller. Everything depends on the balance of interests at that moment.
That's very true. And it's important to remember that diplomacy often moves slowly. Sometimes years pass before a new round of talks happens. Leaders change, political climates evolve, and global events shift priorities. The key lesson for English learners here is how to describe time and possibility naturally. Phrases like, "Talks might resume later this year," or "Relations could improve in the near future," help express that something hasn't happened yet, but there is still a chance it will. This kind of structure is polite, thoughtful, and realistic.
Yes, and another thing we can teach our audience is how tone can make a big difference when using modal verbs. Saying talks might resume sounds neutral and analytical. But if you say talks could definitely resume, it changes the tone. It becomes more optimistic and assertive. Understanding this nuance helps students sound more natural when discussing political or international topics. Diplomacy is full of this kind of language, where small words carry big meanings. It's one of the most fascinating aspects of learning English through world news.
Exactly, Adam. And while we talk about diplomacy, it's worth noting how both countries use language carefully to shape their international image. Official statements from Washington and Pyongyang often include words like commitment, peaceful resolution, mutual respect, and stability. Each word is chosen with purpose. When a government says we may consider new talks, it signals openness without making a promise. For learners, studying such language teaches not only vocabulary, but also emotional intelligence, the ability to read between the lines of political communication.
That's such a valuable lesson, Julia. As of 2025, we can say that the possibility of another meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un remains uncertain. Political priorities, regional dynamics, and public opinion will all play major roles. What matters most for our listeners is learning how to talk about uncertainty in English, because that's how professionals, journalists, and diplomats communicate in real life. Whether it's about politics, economics, or everyday life, words like might, could, and may help express careful, respectful, and intelligent speech.
Beautifully said. Adam. The world is full of uncertainty, but language gives us the tools to describe it clearly. For English learners, understanding how modal verbs function is more than just a grammar exercise. It's a way to think critically and communicate with precision. Whether you're discussing global affairs or personal plans, using these expressions allows you to sound thoughtful, informed, and balanced. So, as we look at the US-North Korea relationship in 2025, we can't say what will happen, but we can explore what might happen. And that's the essence of learning English through real-world stories. In every discussion about international relations, the media plays a major role in shaping public understanding. When it comes to the US and North Korea, journalists often act as the bridge between secret diplomatic decisions and public information. Since 2018, whenever there was even a hint of communication between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, headlines around the world appeared almost instantly. In 2025, the same pattern continues. The media constantly watches for clues, analyzing every word and gesture to predict whether another meeting might happen.
That's absolutely right, Julia. And this brings us to an important lesson for English learners: understanding how the media uses language to express uncertainty. In most political or diplomatic reports, journalists do not have direct access to private meetings or government plans. Instead, they depend on information from what they call sources. You might read sentences like, "Sources say the two sides have exchanged messages," or "Reports suggest that talks could resume soon." These phrases are carefully chosen because the information is not yet officially confirmed.
Exactly, Adam. Expressions such as sources say or reports suggest show that the journalist wants to share possible information while reminding readers that it may not be fully verified. This is one of the most useful things for English learners to understand when reading or listening to international news. These phrases help identify the difference between a fact and a speculation. A fact is something that has been confirmed by an official statement or event, while a speculation is based on guesses, predictions, or incomplete information.
Yes, and to go deeper into this, let's look at another common phrase: rumors indicate. When news outlets use the word rumor, they are signaling that the information is unverified and possibly unreliable. For example, rumors indicate that a new summit might take place later this year. This tells readers that the media has heard something, but there is no confirmation yet. Understanding this difference helps English learners develop critical thinking skills. It trains them to question what they read and look for evidence before accepting something as true.
That's such a good point, Adam. The term confirmation itself is very important in media language. When journalists say, "We are waiting for official confirmation," it means that they are waiting for a government or an official spokesperson to publicly support the information. Until that happens, the news remains uncertain. This is also why media outlets often mention press briefings. A press briefing is an event where government representatives speak to journalists, answer questions, and provide official statements. It's a reliable source for verified information.
Exactly, and English learners can really benefit from paying attention to the tone and phrasing used in such reports. Let's take an example. An anonymous source inside the administration said that discussions might be underway. The phrase anonymous source means that the person giving information does not want to be named. This is common in journalism, especially when the information is sensitive. However, it also means readers should be cautious because it's impossible to verify who that person is or how credible their information might be.
Right, and for students learning English, it's good to notice how journalists combine these phrases to sound both informative and responsible. They might write, "According to multiple reports, officials from both sides may have exchanged letters, though there has been no official confirmation." Here, the use of may have, and though there has been no confirmation, clearly shows that the story is not final. This is a perfect example of professional balanced reporting, giving information but also reminding the audience that the facts are still developing.
Yes, Julia. And that kind of careful language is what separates trustworthy journalism from speculation or gossip. The phrases reports suggest, sources say, and according to officials act as signals for readers. They show where the information comes from and how certain it is. For English learners, Understanding these small linguistic details can completely change how they interpret global news. It also helps them learn to write and speak more precisely in their own conversations, whether they're discussing politics, education, or any other topic.
It's also interesting to note that news about Trump and Kim often spreads faster than most other political stories. The world finds this relationship both unusual and symbolic. A former US president known for his direct communication style, and a North Korean leader known for his secrecy. Because of this, every word, tweet, or speech is analyzed by journalists for hidden meaning. For English learners, this is a great chance to observe how tone, vocabulary, and even punctuation can influence how a message is understood in different cultures.
That's a brilliant observation, Julia. When reading such news, learners should practice asking themselves questions like, who said this? Has it been confirmed? And is this a fact or speculation? These questions build strong analytical skills. For example, if a report says, a spokesperson declined to comment, it means the journalist tried to get confirmation but didn't succeed. This is also part of balanced reporting, showing that not all sides have responded yet. Such details are valuable for understanding the reliability of information.
And the media landscape today moves at incredible speed. With social media platforms spreading news instantly, information can travel across the globe within minutes, sometimes before facts are checked. That's why phrases like official statement and press briefing have become even more important. When a government issues an official statement, it means the information can be trusted as coming directly from the source. In contrast, when the media uses rumors or unnamed sources, it signals that readers should wait for more evidence before believing it completely.
Exactly. This shows how essential it is to understand context. For example, if a journalist writes, reports suggest Trump could be preparing for another visit to Asia, that sentence is filled with uncertainty. The modal verb could and the phrase reports suggest both tell the listener that this is only a possibility, not a fact. When English learners pay attention to such signals, they not only improve their comprehension, but also develop the ability to discuss world events responsibly, without spreading misinformation or exaggeration.
Yes, and I think one of the most powerful skills students can gain from studying political news is learning how to read between the lines. When journalists choose to quote an anonymous source or say, officials familiar with the matter said, they are often hinting that something is happening behind closed doors. But until a confirmation or press briefing occurs, it remains speculation. So when learners encounter such language, they should recognize it as a sign to be patient and wait for more concrete updates.
That's perfectly said, Julia. And from a teaching perspective, this is also a valuable opportunity to expand vocabulary. Words like confirmation, statement, source, briefing, and rumor are not only useful in politics, they are also helpful in everyday communication. For example, you can say, I heard a rumor about a new job opening, or we're waiting for confirmation from the manager. These are practical, real-world phrases that learners can use to sound more natural in both formal and informal contexts.
Exactly, Adam. And this connection between world events and language learning is what makes studying English through news so powerful. It helps students practice grammar, tone, and word choice in real situations. By analyzing how journalists report sensitive topics like US-North Korea relations, learners not only build their vocabulary, but also develop global awareness. They learn that being an informed English speaker means not just understanding words, but understanding how and why those words are used.
So, to sum up this section, the media plays a vital role in shaping how the world perceives events between Trump and Kim Jong-un. However, it's essential to read news carefully, notice the difference between verified facts and unconfirmed reports, and pay attention to linguistic signals like sources say or reports suggest. For English learners, Mastering this skill means developing a sharper, more intelligent way of thinking in English, one that values accuracy, responsibility, and awareness in global communication. Julia, if Trump and Kim Jong-un were to meet again, it would immediately capture global attention. Every international news channel, political analyst, and foreign policy expert would begin to discuss what this meeting could mean for the future of diplomacy. For English learners, this topic is not only about world politics, but also about understanding the power of communication, negotiation, and leadership language. When leaders meet, they use words carefully to send messages not only to each other, but also to the entire world.
That's absolutely true, Adam. A new meeting could be seen in different ways. Some might interpret it as a genuine effort toward peace and cooperation, while others could see it as a display of political showmanship. The interesting thing for learners is that every gesture, every phrase, and even the style of conversation carries meaning. Studying these interactions can help students understand how diplomacy works and how language is used strategically to influence both domestic and international audiences.
Exactly, Julia. For example, in past summits, phrases like commitment to dialogue, mutual understanding, and common goals were used repeatedly. These are not just political clichés. They are tools for negotiation and communication. English learners can study how such phrases create a tone of collaboration without committing to specific actions. It's a way to express possibility and intent while maintaining flexibility, which is an essential skill in both diplomacy and language learning.
And beyond vocabulary, observing these meetings helps learners develop cultural awareness. Understanding how different cultures express respect, disagreement, or optimism teaches students to interpret language in context. For instance, a formal handshake, a bow, or even the order of seating in a meeting can carry symbolic meaning. By learning these cues, students gain insights into international etiquette and the subtle ways that language and culture interact in global diplomacy.
Another important aspect is how such a meeting can teach critical thinking. Students can analyze statements, question what is implied versus what is directly said, and explore multiple perspectives. For example, when a leader says, "We hope to continue productive discussions," the word hope signals optimism, but not certainty. Learning to identify these nuances helps students not only understand world events, but also improve their ability to discuss uncertain situations in English using modal verbs like might, could, and may.
Exactly, Adam. And public speaking is another key lesson. Leaders must communicate clearly, concisely, and persuasively to multiple audiences. Watching press conferences or summit speeches allows learners to hear formal English in action. They can study intonation, pacing, and vocabulary, which can be applied to their own speaking practice. This type of observation helps students develop confidence in expressing ideas thoughtfully and diplomatically in English.
It's also important to note that a potential meeting would highlight negotiation strategies. Leaders use careful language to signal willingness to compromise or to assert priorities without creating conflict. For example, saying, "We are open to discussions on shared interests," conveys flexibility while still maintaining a firm stance. English learners can adopt this style to improve persuasive communication in business, education, or personal interactions, learning how to balance firmness with politeness.
Yes, Adam. Finally, studying the possibility of another Trump-Kim meeting encourages curiosity about international relations. Even without taking sides, students can explore how diplomacy functions, how agreements are proposed, and how leaders manage complex situations. This type of learning not only strengthens English skills, but also broadens knowledge of global affairs, negotiation language, and intercultural communication, all of which are invaluable for anyone aiming to become an effective communicator in English.
In conclusion, while we cannot predict exactly what would happen if Trump and Kim Jong-un meet again, analyzing the potential outcomes provides excellent material for English learners. From vocabulary and modal verbs to critical thinking, cultural awareness, and public speaking, studying such events gives students real-world examples of how language operates in high-stakes situations. It shows that learning English can be practical, insightful, and deeply connected to understanding the world.
Adam, one of the most interesting aspects of studying international relations is noticing how English functions as the global language of diplomacy. Even when leaders do not speak it as their first language, English often becomes the medium for high-level negotiations, press conferences, and official statements. This is because English provides a common platform where messages can be clearly conveyed and misunderstandings can be minimized. For English learners, observing these interactions provides insight into how language can be used to manage complex, sensitive situations effectively.
Absolutely, Julia. And when we look at examples from global meetings, we notice that certain phrases are chosen very carefully to reduce tension and encourage dialogue. For instance, statements like, "We hope to continue constructive discussions," or "We are committed to finding mutually beneficial solutions," are common in diplomatic communication. These phrases do not make promises, but signal willingness to cooperate. For learners, this shows how vocabulary can be used strategically to maintain politeness while still expressing intentions clearly.
That's right, Adam. Another important point is the frequent use of indirect expressions in diplomacy. Instead of saying something directly, leaders often choose wording that softens the message. For example, instead of saying, "We disagree with your proposal," a diplomat might say, "We appreciate your suggestion, but we see some challenges that need further discussion." This approach maintains respect, prevents confrontation, and keeps channels of communication open. English learners can learn a lot from this about how to express disagreement politely.
Exactly, Julia. Politeness is not just about being nice, it's also about strategy. In international diplomacy, words are carefully crafted to avoid escalating conflict. Terms like consider, explore, dialogue, and under consideration appear frequently because they suggest openness without creating tension. For students, noticing these patterns provides a practical lesson in how word choice influences tone and outcome. It also demonstrates that learning English is not only about grammar, but also about understanding nuance and context.
Yes, and beyond vocabulary, observing diplomatic communication teaches cultural respect. In international meetings, every word is weighed for its potential impact on different audiences. Leaders must show sensitivity to cultural norms, history, and political context. For English learners, this means that improving language skills is closely linked to improving intercultural communication. By studying diplomatic phrases, students learn to adapt their language depending on the listener, creating thoughtful and respectful conversations across cultures.
Another key lesson is how English allows for clarity without confrontation. Consider a sentence like, "We recognize the importance of your position and look forward to exploring options together." It conveys acknowledgement, respect, and cooperation in just a few words. For learners, these examples are practical guides for professional communication in English. Whether negotiating business deals, participating in international conferences, or managing group projects, these strategies help convey ideas in ways that reduce misunderstanding and promote positive dialogue.
And it's not only formal statements that provide learning opportunities. Press conferences, interviews, and even social media messages from leaders contain valuable examples of diplomatic English. Phrases like, "We will continue to engage," "It is our shared responsibility," and "We encourage dialogue" are used to convey politeness, openness, and professionalism. English learners can analyze these messages to understand tone, indirectness, and the importance of precise vocabulary. All essential skills for communication in international contexts.
Exactly. Another aspect is learning how to balance assertiveness with diplomacy. In many global meetings, leaders must make their position clear without appearing aggressive. For example, saying, We respectfully request further consideration expresses firmness while remaining polite. English learners can adopt this principle in everyday interactions, using words and sentence structures that allow them to stand their ground while maintaining respect and professionalism.
And let's not forget the role of body language and speech patterns in diplomatic English. While vocabulary is crucial, the way words are delivered, tone, pacing, and gestures also communicates respect and intent. Observing these elements can help learners improve not just their speaking, but their overall communication skills. It emphasizes that English learning is not only about words on a page, but also about how language interacts with culture, context, and human behavior.
Yes, Julia, and ultimately, studying diplomatic language offers a broader perspective on communication. Learners can see how careful phrasing, indirect expressions, and cultural sensitivity work together to maintain relationships, resolve conflicts, and build trust. It teaches students that learning English is about more than grammar and vocabulary. It's about thinking critically, observing context, and speaking thoughtfully. These lessons can be applied to international relations, professional settings, and personal communication, making English a powerful tool for global understanding.
Absolutely, Adam. By focusing on diplomatic language, learners discover how English can bridge cultures, convey respect, and support negotiation and problem-solving. Whether analyzing Trump and Kim's interactions or studying other international dialogues, students gain insight into the importance of tone, word choice, and cultural awareness. Improving English in this way is not just academic. It's practical, empowering, and essential for anyone aiming to communicate effectively in today's interconnected world.
In conclusion, diplomacy teaches us that thoughtful language can achieve more than force or confrontation. For English learners, observing and analyzing diplomatic English provides lessons in vocabulary, grammar, tone, and cultural awareness. It shows that mastering a language is not only about accuracy, but also about learning to communicate thoughtfully, respectfully, and strategically across borders. By studying these examples, students enhance their ability to navigate both global issues and everyday communication with confidence. Julia, as we reach the end of today's discussion, it's clear that exploring the question of whether Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un might meet again offers lessons far beyond politics. While the topic may seem specific to international relations, it actually teaches us about communication, critical thinking, and global awareness. For English learners, following these events allows us to see how language operates in real-life situations, how word choice can influence meaning, and how careful phrasing can manage delicate conversations across cultures.
Absolutely, Adam. What's fascinating is that English becomes the bridge connecting people from all corners of the world. By studying diplomatic interactions, news reports, and official statements, learners gain insights into vocabulary, grammar, and tone while simultaneously understanding the broader context of international relations. We learn how leaders communicate uncertainty, express respect, and maintain dialogue even in tense situations. This teaches students that English is not just a tool for conversation. It is a way to explore ideas, analyze events, and think critically.
Yes, and another important takeaway is that English enables us to remain calm and intelligent when observing world events. For example, when reading media reports filled with phrases like sources say, reports suggest, or could happen, learners can distinguish between speculation and confirmed facts. This skill of analyzing language critically encourages thoughtful reflection rather than impulsive judgment. In this way, English becomes a tool for reasoning and understanding, helping students interpret global news carefully and responsibly.
Exactly, Adam. Moreover, studying how language is used in diplomacy teaches us valuable lessons about politeness, cultural respect, and strategic communication. Words such as mutual understanding, constructive dialogue, and shared goals are not just political jargon. They are examples of how language can reduce conflict, encourage cooperation, and convey respect across cultures. For English learners, practicing these phrases and understanding their use can improve both speaking and writing skills, while also cultivating sensitivity to different perspectives.
And beyond vocabulary, learners also develop global awareness. Following international relations stories encourages curiosity about countries, cultures, and political systems. It shows how interconnected our world is, and how decisions made in one part of the globe can impact people far away. For students of English, this awareness reinforces the idea that language is not only a communication tool, but also a window into history, society, and human behavior. By combining language learning with understanding world events, students enrich both their minds and their English skills simultaneously.
That's a very important point, Adam. Another aspect we want to emphasize is critical thinking. By analyzing news, diplomatic speeches, and official statements, learners practice interpreting meaning, recognizing tone, and distinguishing fact from speculation. They also learn to use modal verbs like might, could, and may to describe uncertainty. A skill that is crucial both in political contexts and in everyday English. This encourages students to express ideas carefully, think analytically, and communicate effectively in situations that require nuance and subtlety.
Yes, Julia. And let's not forget the motivational aspect for learners. Understanding world events through English shows that learning a language is more than memorizing grammar rules or vocabulary lists. It is a tool to explore, connect, and discover. English allows students to follow global discussions, engage with different perspectives, and expand their horizons. It opens doors to knowledge that goes beyond textbooks, allowing learners to think critically and participate in conversations with confidence.
Exactly. And for all our listeners, we want to leave you with this thought. Keep learning, stay curious, and use your English to explore the world. Every word you learn, every sentence you understand, brings you closer to connecting with people, understanding ideas, and engaging thoughtfully with global events. Your English is a bridge to knowledge, to new perspectives, and to meaningful communication across cultures.
Before we finish, we want to thank our listeners for joining us today on the English Globe. Your participation matters, so please leave a comment telling us where you are listening from and share your opinions about today's discussion. We would love to hear your thoughts on global diplomacy, English learning, or any questions you may have.
And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the English Globe so you can continue learning with us. We promise to bring you more educational content, interesting discussions, and practical English learning tips every week. Your support allows us to keep creating content that helps learners around the world improve their English while understanding the world better.
In conclusion, the story of Trump and Kim, like many global events, teaches us that language is not just about words, it's about connection, understanding, and insight. By learning English thoughtfully, students can engage with the world in a meaningful way, think critically about events, and express themselves confidently. Remember, every time you practice your English, you're not just learning a language, you're opening your mind to the world.
Thank you again for listening. Keep learning, stay curious, and continue using English as your tool to explore and understand the world. We'll see you in the next episode on the English Globe.